In the dim light of his study, the candle flame danced as Dr. Faustus leaned over ancient books. His fingers trembled, tracing texts that promised knowledge no mortal had ever dared to claim. Shadows stretched across the walls, crawling like living things, and the wind rattled the window panes, urging him on. Faustus had everything a man could want: a brilliant mind, boundless ambition, and an insatiable curiosity. Yet, he was profoundly unsatisfied. Medicine, law, theology, philosophy, each discipline felt like a cage, too small to contain the vast hunger that consumed him. He wanted more. He wanted a power that could bend reality, command obedience, and transcend death itself. And so, in the suffocating silence of his chamber, he whispered to the void, "Why should I be bound by human limits?" As if in answer, the air grew heavy. The shadows seemed to lean in, listening. A chill rose from the floorboards, a cold that was not of this world. Faustus didn't know it yet, but forces far older than humanity had heard his call, and they were coming. This wasn't his first foray into the forbidden. He had already studied necromancy, read texts barred to the righteous, and secretly summoned spirits. In the deepest hours of the night, he had walked among entities whose eyes burned with alien intelligence. Angels had warned him, scholars had scoffed, friends had pleaded with him to turn back, but the fire inside him refused to be quenched. The temptation only grew stronger. One night, a figure appeared before him. It was neither human nor entirely beast, hovering in the darkness, tall and thin. Its presence was a physical pressure against his mind. Faustus didn't run. He recognized it for what it was, an emissary of the ultimate promise. The creature spoke, its voice like silk and smoke. "Faustus, your mind hungers. I offer what no other can. Knowledge, power, pleasures beyond your wildest imaginings. Your will alone sets the price." Faustus's heart hammered in his chest, a storm of fear and desire raging within him. The figure waited, silent but commanding, and then it named itself, Mephistopheles. The pact was brutally simple. To gain everything he desired, Faustus would have to surrender his soul. 24 years of absolute power, wealth, and knowledge in exchange for an eternity in hell. The contract shimmered before him, invisible yet tangible. He felt the weight of his choice pressing down like iron. "Am I a fool?" he whispered. "Am I damned already?" Mephistopheles merely smiled. "Not yet," it said, "but the clock has begun." And so, Faustus signed in spirit, if not in ink. The world shifted beneath his feet. The shadows receded, the room brightened with an unnatural light. And he felt a surge of power, unlike anything he had ever known. At first, the thrill was intoxicating. He called forth spirits, bent the wills of others, conjured breathtaking illusions, and walked among kings and princes without ever leaving his chamber. The world became clay in his hands. Every temptation, every desire, every ambition was suddenly within his grasp. But even as he reveled in his new abilities, a whisper followed him, low and insistent, impossible to ignore. A voice that asked, in tones like scraping metal, "What have you traded for this pleasure?" He laughed it off. He wouldn't face the truth. Every indulgence made him bolder. Every display of power hardened his resolve. He summoned wealth, women, and glory. He mocked the church, ridiculed the clergy, and made the most learned men tremble at his skill. Yet, in the quiet moments, when the laughter faded and the shadows crept back in, Faustus felt a creeping unease. He had bought the world, yes, but at what cost? The thought of his soul, of the eternity that awaited him, loomed like a storm on the horizon. The first true test of his new life came not from his enemies, but from his own desires. Summoned to a court of kings, he was tasked with performing feats of magic no mortal could ever hope to achieve. The crowds roared, their eyes glittering with a mixture of awe and fear. He conjured visions, made gold appear from thin air, and summoned spirits that danced and bowed at his command. But with every triumph, he felt the pull of the infernal bargain tightening its grip. Every victory was just another step closer to the abyss. At night, he would wander alone through his chambers. The wind rattled the windows. The candle flames bowed as if under some invisible weight, and Faustus could hear whispers, faint but unmistakable. They came from the shadows, voices of the damned, voices of angels warning him, and the voice of his own conscience pleading with him to repent. And still, he resisted. Repentance was weakness. Fear was weakness. Only power mattered. Mephistopheles became both his companion and his tormentor. The demon revealed secrets of the universe that thrilled and frightened Faustus in equal measure. Forbidden arts, the ability to see into the hearts of men, and the capacity to twist reality itself. But with each revelation, Mephistopheles would remind him of the price. "You have signed," it said softly one night, a dark shape in the corner of the room. "Do not forget, when the time comes, I will claim what is mine." Faustus shivered. He hadn't forgotten, but he couldn't turn back. He had crossed a line from which there was no return. He had unleashed something he could no longer control. It was then that Faustus began to see glimpses of his own ruin. Friends and scholars would visit, completely unaware of the pact he had made, unaware of the invisible eyes that watched their every move. He could charm them, amaze them, but in their awe, he saw a reflection of the darkness growing inside him. He was living proof that even the brightest intellect cannot resist the seduction of absolute power. That even the most rational mind will bend when desire outweighs morality. He thought of heaven. He thought of God. He thought of redemption. But each thought was quickly consumed by doubt, then by defiance. The clock of his soul ticked closer and closer to damnation. Yet he could not turn away from the pleasures of the present. And then, the first true hint of horror appeared. One night, when he was alone, a vision of hell itself flashed before his eyes, a fiery abyss filled with writhing souls, their screams echoing beyond comprehension. This was no mere product of his imagination. He felt the crushing weight of eternity, the judgment he had so cleverly evaded now becoming unavoidable. Mephistopheles laughed softly. "You see it, do you not? This is the path you have chosen. There is no escape, only power, and the end." Faustus recoiled, but he could not retreat. The thrill of mastery was too intoxicating. The shadows, the whispers, the visions, they became both his companions and his chains. So, the first part of Faustus' story closes on the jagged edge of suspense. In the quiet hours of the night, he stood alone in his chamber, the candle flickering, the shadows shifting, and the wind moaning through the trees. He could feel the weight of the contract pressing down on him, invisible yet relentless. The hour of his reckoning had not yet come, but it would. The thrill of power had just begun, and the terror of its price was only just starting to awaken. Faustus reveled in the power he had gained, a power that seemed to bend the very fabric of the world to his will. Kings marveled at his feats, scholars trembled at his knowledge, and whispers of his mastery over forbidden forces echoed through every court. Yet, with each indulgence, an invisible weight pressed heavier upon his soul. In the quiet corners of his mind, a whisper of doubt began to stir beneath the roar of triumph. Even as he conjured storms from clear skies, raised spirits from the abyss, and summoned visions that left men gasping in awe, Faustus could feel the faint pull of eternity stretching before him, dark and endless. At night, the shadows in his study seemed to breathe, their movements mimicking the ticking of some infernal clock. When he closed his eyes, he saw flashes of fire and smoke, of writhing forms in torment. He knew then that the contract he had signed was not a mere formality. It was a chain, invisible but unbreakable, wrapping tighter around him with every passing day. Mephistopheles was his constant companion, a demon whose loyalty was a form of menace. The fiend guided him, warned him, and often mocked him with a subtle, chilling cruelty. "Do you enjoy it?" Mephistopheles asked one evening, his form half hidden in the shadows of Faustus' study. The candlelight flickered across the demon's face, illuminating eyes that glinted with a terrible, ancient understanding. "I do," Faustus admitted, though a knot of unease twisted in his stomach. "I have power beyond imagining. I am the master of forces no mortal could command. What more could a man possibly desire?" "Ah," said Mephistopheles, his voice a soft, dangerous whisper. But have you considered the cost? Every pleasure is borrowed. Every triumph is a shadow. The clock ticks. Faustus, you cannot escape what you have sold. Faustus forced a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. He desperately wanted to believe he was free, that he controlled everything, that he alone was the master of his fate. But deep down, he sensed the intricate trap he was in. Every spell he cast, every spirit he summoned, every breathtaking display of power was another thread in a web he could not see. A web that was slowly, inexorably closing around him. As time wore on, Faustus's indulgences grew bolder, more reckless. He summoned the ghosts of historical figures to his dinner table, conjured visions of distant, exotic lands for his own amusement, and mocked kings with illusions that bent reality itself. His mastery became the stuff of legend, but it was accompanied by a subtle, creeping torment. Objects in his room would move when he wasn't looking. Strange whispers seemed to follow him down empty hallways. Shadows shifted and danced, untethered from any source of light. Faustus began to fear that the power he had demanded was more alive than he had ever imagined, as if the very forces of hell were watching him, waiting, breathing with a will of their own. One night, alone in his chamber, Faustus was seized by a vision so vivid it shook him to his core. He saw himself in a fiery abyss, chained and screaming, tormented by grotesque creatures whose faces mirrored his own, twisted in agony. The screams were his, yet they felt alien, torn from a part of him he didn't know. He woke in a cold sweat, gasping for air, certain he had just glimpsed the terrible fate that awaited him. Mephistopheles appeared silently beside his bed. A warning, the demon asked, its tone laced with amusement. No, Faustus replied, struggling to mask his terror. Merely a shadow. Merely a shadow. Yes, the demon purred. But shadows often stretch longer than we expect, even as his nights grew darker and more fraught with fear. Faustus sought pleasures that defied all mortal limits. He courted the most beautiful women, flaunted unimaginable wealth, and entered the courts of Europe as a magician whose powers were simply unmatched. Every human face he saw was a reminder that he was no longer simply human himself. The marvels he created left people enthralled, but they also deepened his profound isolation. He could manipulate the world, bend minds, and summon wonders from nothing. But he could not summon a moment of peace or escape the shadow that followed him relentlessly. Sometimes, at the very edge of his perception, he thought he saw angels, not quite corporeal, their ethereal forms shimmering with sorrow and warning. In those moments, he wondered if repentance was still possible. But each fledgling thought of salvation was quickly drowned by the intoxicating thrill of power, by the irresistible lure of forbidden knowledge, and by the ever-present voice of Mephistopheles, always urging him onward, deeper into the dark. Then came the first direct test of his infernal bargain. To entertain the German emperor, Faustus conjured illusions of breathtaking grandeur, showing him wonders beyond imagination. As the emperor and his court marveled, Faustus noticed a strange shadow moving among the crowd, a figure that seemed almost human, but moved with an unnatural, gliding grace. The air in the great hall grew cold. Candles flickered violently. The room itself seemed to lean forward in anticipation. The figure stepped closer. It was neither angel nor demon, but something else entirely. A stark reminder of the world of grace Faustus had so arrogantly abandoned. Its voice cut through the collective awe of the assembly, low and insistent. "Faustus," it said, "you have claimed what is not yours. Do you understand the weight of your choice?" For a moment, Faustus faltered. His heart hammered in his chest, but he quickly recovered, weaving a new illusion to banish the figure from sight. The crowd cheered, completely unaware of the chilling interruption. But Faustus felt the cold truth of the creature's words pierce his heart. He had just glimpsed a consequence beyond his control, a judgment he could not command, and the memory of it would haunt him from the day forward. The days bled into weeks, and Faustus's indulgence curled into recklessness. He conjured phantom armies, summoned mythical beasts from the pages of forgotten lore, and traveled across entire continents in a single thought. And yet, each new marvel carried the faint, mocking echo of what awaited him at the end of his 24 years. His nights became a sleepless torment, his mind growing brittle under the constant pressure of forbidden knowledge. The shadows whispered his name, the wind howled with voices only he could hear, and the fires of hell seemed to echo faintly in every flicker of flame. Mephistopheles never let him forget, reminding him with subtle cruelty that the clock was always moving, always ticking down. Faustus tried to ignore it, throwing himself into the grandeur of his powers, basking in the awe of crowds, and losing himself in the intoxicating depths of the knowledge he now wielded. But no amount of spectacle could silence the inner voice that grew louder each day. You are not free. You are bound. Your soul is sold. As the years approached their midpoint, Faustus began to seriously contemplate the end. For the first time, he felt true, primal fear not of death or mortality, but of an eternity spent in damnation. The visions of fire and torment now plagued him whenever he closed his eyes. And in those visions, he heard the endless cries of a soul utterly lost, screaming for a mercy that would never, ever come. The initial thrill of mastery had completely given way to the stark horror of realization. Every moment of pleasure had been borrowed. Every display of power was just another reminder of the price he had paid. Faustus knew he had chosen his own path, yet the weight of its inevitability pressed down on him like a gathering storm, relentless and unyielding. The hellbound servitude Mephistopheles had once promised him now seemed to have a life of its own. Shadows twisted into menacing shapes in his rooms, whispers followed him through crowded streets, and the chill of unseen eyes pressed upon him wherever he went. Faustus was beginning to understand the first lesson of true damnation. It is not a punishment inflicted from the outside. It is a terror born from within, the mind and soul imprisoned by their own choices. The second part of Faustus' story closes on this dark, foreboding note. Alone in his chamber, with candlelight dancing against the walls, he heard the faintest whisper rise from the shadows. The end draws near. He knew the shadows spoke the truth. The pleasures, the knowledge, the power, they were all slipping away like sand through his fingers. What remained was terror, despair, and the crushing inevitability of what he had willingly invited into his life. And the great clock of eternity ticked on. It sounded louder than any thunder, counting down to a fate he could not escape. Time slipped like sand through Faustus' fingers. The 24 years he had bargained for with Mephistopheles were nearly over, and the full weight of his decision pressed down like iron chains upon his mind and soul. What had once seemed like the intoxicating thrill of absolute power had now curdled into an abyss of fear and despair. The streets, the courts, the halls of kings he had dazzled all seemed hollow. Every marvel now echoed with a sinister truth. It was borrowed, temporary, and would vanish with the closing of the contract. Faustus could no longer sleep. Even when he closed his eyes, he saw flames, writhing faces, and the shadows of eternity creeping closer. The whispers that had haunted him in the early days now became roars, carrying the laughter of demons and the wails of the damned. Every spell he had cast, every vision he had conjured, every pleasure he had indulged in had all been for nothing. The night came, the final night, and Faustus wandered through his study, as if it were a tomb. Candles flickered in the cold draft, shadows writhing across the walls. He could feel Mephistopheles waiting, somewhere unseen yet inevitable. The demon had been a constant companion, a guide through forbidden knowledge, a tormentor and confidant alike. Now, it was a harbinger, a reminder of the price that could not be avoided. You know the hour approaches, Mephistopheles said softly from the darkness. Soon, you will be mine, and all your power, all your knowledge will avail you nothing. Faustus' hands shook. Is there no mercy? He whispered, more to himself than to the demon. Can all that I have done not be undone? Mephistopheles' laughter rippled like cold steel across the room. Mercy is not given to those who sell their souls for power. You are too late. All that remains is the reckoning. As the clock of fate ticked toward its final moment, Faustus's mind raced. He had tempted kings, conjured devils, summoned spirits, and defied heaven itself, but none of it could save him now. He ran through memories of his triumphs, the awe of rulers, the marvel of the impossible feats he had conjured, the pleasures of forbidden knowledge, and yet each memory brought only emptiness. The world he had manipulated, the joy he had stolen, all of it crumbled into nothing when he faced the inescapable truth. He was alone, eternally alone. In his chambers, shadows seemed to coalesce into shapes, faces of those he had wronged, angels he had scorned, visions of the fires that awaited him. Faustus fell to his knees, his voice trembling. "Oh, God, if there is mercy, now, I beg it." But no answer came, only the cold, indifferent whisper of the void. The final hour arrived. Faustus could hear the faintest wind echoing like a chorus of the damned. Candles flickered and guttered. His hands clawed at his robes, at the table, at anything that might anchor him to life. Every nerve screamed in terror as the weight of eternity pressed upon him. He knew that every spell, every incantation, every pleasure he had conjured was meaningless. The knowledge he had gained, the illusions he had performed, even the power he had wielded, it would not save him from what awaited. Mephistopheles appeared at the edge of the room, tall and terrible in the flickering light. His eyes glowed, reflecting the fires of hell itself. "The moment is here," the demon intoned. "The reckoning you have avoided for so long is upon you." Faustus could not speak. He could not plead. He could only tremble as the shadows stretched and twisted, consuming the corners of the room. The fires of hell seemed to flash before his eyes. He tried to remember joy, love, life, but every memory was tainted by ambition, by pride, by the unrelenting desire that had led him here. And then, in a heartbeat, it was upon him. The room became a furnace of darkness and flame. The air itself burned, a cold fire that scorched the soul rather than flesh. Faustus cried out, a sound torn from the deepest terror. Of the human heart, the angels he had mocked, the powers he had defied, the knowledge he had stolen, all became a chorus of condemnation. The doorways of eternity yawned open, and he could feel the chains of hell binding him, pulling him toward a fate beyond imagination. In those final moments, Faustus glimpsed the truth that had eluded him all his life. Power without conscience is a curse. Knowledge without morality a prison. His soul, sold for earthly pleasure and fleeting marvels, was now claimed by the darkness he had courted for so long. Mephistopheles stood by, silent, a witness to the inevitability. "All that you desired," he whispered, "is gone, and all that you feared has come." As Faustus was drawn into the void, the shadows and flames seemed to merge into one endless night. He screamed not in anger, not in defiance, but in the despair of a mind finally understanding its own folly. The world, with all its marvels and pleasures, became a memory, slipping like smoke through his grasp. The fire consumed, the darkness swallowed, and the soul of Dr. Faustus vanished into eternity, leaving behind only a warning for those who would follow in his steps. Yet even in this final torment, there was a strange clarity. Faustus understood, too late, that ambition unchecked by conscience is the deadliest of all forces. Desire, once a spark, had become a blaze that devoured not only his life but the very essence of his being. And somewhere, in the shadows beyond mortal sight, Mephistopheles smiled. The bargain was complete. The price was paid. The lesson, eternal. The chamber fell silent. Candles burned low, their flames flickering against empty walls. The wind whispered through the night, carrying the echoes of Faustus's final cries. Scholars would speak of him. Tales would be told of the man who sought power beyond human limits. But those who knew the truth, the shadow that lingered, the voice that whispered in the wind, understood that ambition without restraint is not freedom. It is a chain. It is a curse. It is hell itself. Faustus was gone, and yet the story remained, haunting the hearts and minds of those who dared to dream too boldly, think too deeply, or reach too far into the darkness. Welcome to Everdark Stories. where we explore the eternal truth that ambition is a fire that will consume the soul. Desire unchecked, knowledge untempered, power unbound. Beware the bargain, for the price is eternal. Thank you for listening. Remember to subscribe for more tales from the shadows.